Imagine waking up in 1922. The economy is roaring out of World War I, and American factories have stopped building tanks. Now they are pumping out consumer goods, toasters, vacuum cleaners, and electric refrigerators. The cities are flush with cash, and people genuinely believe the good times will last forever. Industrial momentum was exploding, driven largely by the automotive sector. Thanks to Henry Ford's moving assembly belt, building a car went from taking 12 hours down to 90 minutes. Vehicles flooded the streets, pulling industries like oil, steel, and rubber right into their slipstream. That massive industrial wealth poured straight into consumer tech. Suddenly, America fell in love with gadgets. By 1929, 10 million homes had radios, bringing live jazz and daily news directly into living rooms across the country. But to keep this party going, urban America developed a dangerous new hobby: buying stuff they couldn't afford. Banks introduced the installment plan. If you wanted a car or a radio, you didn't need the cash up front. You could buy it now and pay later, bringing consumer credit into everyday life for the very first time. This diagram illustrates exactly how that credit addiction mutated when it reached Wall Street. They called it the margin loan. It allowed an ordinary citizen to buy $100 worth of stock by putting down only a $10 coin. A broker or a bank simply fronted the remaining 90. Anyone with a pulse could suddenly gamble on the market. Between 1924 and 1929, the Dow Jones quadrupled in value. Companies set up holding companies that owned other holding companies based on absolutely nothing but hype, while the entire soaring structure rested on a tiny, fragile base of pocket change. The math was broken. The prosperity of the 1920s wasn't supported by actual profits or solid capital. The entire decade was a towering, top-heavy engine of borrowed money that was just waiting for a stiff breeze. On October 29, 1929, Black Tuesday, that breeze arrived. The stock market took a flawless 10-meter dive into concrete. Panic selling erased roughly $200 billion in wealth almost instantly. America woke up rich and went to bed completely broke. As this flowchart shows, the crash triggered an immediate lethal chain reaction, starting with margin calls. Because the market tanked, brokers instantly demanded that borrowed $90 back. But the investors' paper fortunes had vanished. They had nothing left to repay the loans. That localized Wall Street panic immediately spread to Main Street. Ordinary citizens realized those grand marble-floored banks had built their reserves on those same worthless paper loans and blind optimism. People ran to get their money out. Terrified crowds stormed local branches, banging on locked doors and demanding their life savings. But the vaults were empty. Grandparents' bonds, college funds, and retirement accounts were simply gone. Then, the disaster crossed the ocean. Desperate U.S. banks began calling in massive loans they had made to European countries rebuilding after World War I. Germany's fragile economy collapsed, Britain wobbled, and global trade choked, falling by half in just 3 years. The sheer speed of the contagion revealed a terrifying truth. The financial system had absolutely no blast doors. Without any fail-safes in place to contain a panic, a localized crash in New York was able to drag the entire globe into the dark. By 1931, the evaporation of paper wealth turned into a brutal physical reality. Great industrial machines stopped turning. Production collapsed by 75%, and a staggering 1 in every 4 Americans who wanted to work couldn't find a job. Desperation crept into the cities. Endless, quiet bread lines snaked through downtowns, as fathers and mothers relied on charity missions for a bowl of thin soup. Out in the Great Plains, the agricultural sector face-planted into an environmental apocalypse. Years of aggressive, mechanized farming had stripped the topsoil bare. When a severe drought hit, the winds picked up the loose dirt, creating biblical black blizzards that suffocated livestock and buried crops. The Dust Bowl forced millions of rural Americans to abandon the heartland entirely. Families packed everything they had into broken-down cars and fled toward California, chasing desperate rumors of work that rarely existed. In Washington, President Herbert Hoover refused to deploy large-scale federal aid, insisting the economy would correct itself. In response, destitute citizens built sprawling shanty towns out of scrap and cardboard, sarcastically naming them Hoovervilles. In the summer of 1932, the tension reached a violent breaking point. Thousands of World War I veterans marched on the Capitol, peacefully demanding the service bonuses they were promised. The government responded by sending the army to fire tear gas and burn their camps to the ground. It was a moment of total national fracture. Millions of starving citizens watched their government turn weapons on its own veterans. The public lost faith in the capitalist engine, and they lost faith in the institutions built to protect them. In March 1933, Franklin Delano Roosevelt took the oath of office and immediately addressed the country's psychological paralysis. Telling the nation that the only thing they had to fear was fear itself, he gave America its first deep breath in years. FDR immediately rolled out his hardware solution, putting the nation back to work. He launched massive federal programs like the Civilian Conservation Corps, handing young men shovels, a wage, and a clear purpose. These public works programs operated on a monumental scale. The Tennessee Valley Authority built massive dams that controlled flooding and brought electricity to entirely dark regions of the country, rebuilding the grid and lifting national pride at the same time. But physical labor wasn't enough. FDR needed a software solution to fix the underlying mechanics. This blueprint-style schematic highlights the new economic architecture he installed. Heavy regulatory blast doors came crashing down to separate Wall Street speculation from everyday banking. The Securities and Exchange Commission, or SEC, was created to police Wall Street and enforce transparency. Meanwhile, the FDIC was established to guarantee civilian bank deposits. If a bank failed now, the federal government strictly protected your savings from disappearing. To anchor this new system, Roosevelt signed the Social Security Act. It established a permanent baseline safety net, ensuring that the elderly and the vulnerable would never again be left to starve if the market took a dive. The collapse forced America to completely tear down a fragile, speculative economy and rebuild it with permanent structural safeguards. Piece by piece, the nation forged itself into a resilient industrial powerhouse, standing back up to face the massive global storm gathering on the horizon.